The last time I saw my father-in-law alive, he was signing the documents that would transfer control of Blackwell Industries to his son, my husband David, while I stood in the shadows of his mahogany-paneled office, invisible as always. Maxwell Blackwell didn't even glance in my direction, his steel-gray eyes focused only on his attorney and the empire he had built from nothing. "The board meeting is Tuesday," he told David, his voice gravelly from decades of expensive cigars. "Don't disappoint me." 2 days later, Maxwell Blackwell was found dead in his penthouse apartment, an empty bottle of scotch and his heart medication on the nightstand beside him. My name is Eleanor Blackwell, though for the first 30 years of my life I was Eleanor Chen, daughter of immigrants who taught physics at a small university in the Midwest. Until 3 years ago, I was a research scientist specializing in sustainable energy solutions. Now I'm the widow of David Blackwell, heir to one of the country's largest energy conglomerates, and the woman Maxwell Blackwell spent the last year of his life trying to erase from his family's legacy. The memorial service was a spectacle of wealth and influence. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities filled the cathedral, their somber expressions carefully maintained for the cameras outside. In the front row, Charlotte Blackwell, Maxwell's second wife, only 15 years older than me, sat regally in black channel, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair partially hidden under a lace veil. She didn't cry. Neither did I. "He always said you were after the money," Charlotte whispered as we stood side by side at the reception, both of us holding untouched glasses of champagne. Poor David. He never saw it coming. I met her gaze steadily. "David and I met in a research lab, Charlotte, before I knew his last name or had any idea who his father was." Charlotte's smile was as cold as the diamonds at her throat. "And yet here you are in Louboutins instead of lab coats. Funny how quickly principles change when there are billions at stake." What Charlotte didn't know, what no one knew, was that David had come to my lab specifically to meet me. He'd read my research papers on renewable energy storage solutions, technologies that could have transformed his father's fossil fuel empire if Maxwell had been willing to evolve. David believed in my work. He believed in me. When David introduced me to his father at the Blackwell Industries annual charity gala, Maxwell had looked me up and down like I was a racehorse he was considering purchasing. "A scientist," he'd said, the word dripping with disdain. How unusual. David had squeezed my hand. "Eleanor's research could revolutionize our energy division, Dad. She's brilliant." Maxwell's eyes had narrowed. "We'll see." For the next 2 years, I tried to win Maxwell's approval. I attended the right parties, joined the right clubs, donated to the right charities. I even shelved my research to take a symbolic position at Blackwell Industries' sustainability department, a department that existed primarily for PR purposes and had no actual influence on company policy. David encouraged me to be patient. "He'll come around," he promised. "He just needs time to see what I see in you." But Maxwell Blackwell had no intention of seeing anything in me except a threat to his legacy. A week after David and I announced that I was pregnant, Maxwell called his son to his office. "The girl or the company," Charlotte told me he'd said, "your choice." David chose me. We found out later that same day that he'd already been removed from the company credit cards, his access to corporate accounts restricted. By evening, we'd been informed that the penthouse apartment where we lived, technically a company property, would need to be vacated by the end of the month. "It doesn't matter," David had said, holding me as I cried. "We have each other. We have the baby. We'll start over." But Maxwell wasn't finished. Suddenly, news outlets were running stories about ethical concerns regarding my previous research. Former colleagues received inquiries about my work, my character, my relationships. Funding for projects I'd been associated with was mysteriously pulled. Academic journals that had previously published my work started sending rejection notices for new submissions. David fought back, using his connections, his remaining influence. For 6 months, we waged a quiet war against Maxwell's campaign to discredit me. Then David started getting headaches, severe, debilitating headaches that left him unable to function for days at a time. The diagnosis came just before Christmas: glioblastoma, aggressive, inoperable, terminal. Maxwell reappeared in our lives then, all concern and paternal authority. He moved us back into a Blackwell property, for the best care. and took control of David's treatment plan, flying in specialists from around the world. "Family comes first," he announced to the press, standing outside the hospital after David's first surgery. Charlotte at his side, both of them portraits of concerned parents. I was not invited to the press conference. As David's condition deteriorated, so did my position in the family hierarchy. Maxwell made all decisions regarding his care. Charlotte controlled who could visit and when. I was relegated to the role of grieving wife, expected to be appropriately devastated but not involved. "David wouldn't want you stressed in your condition," Maxwell would say, patting my growing belly with proprietary affection whenever cameras or visitors were present. The moment they left, his hand would drop and he'd walk away without another word. When David slipped into a coma in his 7th month of treatment, Maxwell filed for temporary guardianship, claiming David's mental incapacity made him unable to make medical decisions. The court appointed a neutral third party to evaluate the situation, a former business associate of Maxwell's who recommended that Maxwell be granted decision-making authority. I wasn't even informed of the hearing until after it had happened. "It's for the best, Eleanor," Charlotte told me, her voice honeyed with false sympathy. "You need to focus on the baby. These complex medical and business matters would only distress you." David died on a Wednesday morning in May. I was at a mandatory prenatal appointment that Charlotte had scheduled for me. By the time I reached the hospital, his body had already been moved. Funeral arrangements had already been made. Maxwell's attorneys were already preparing statements for the press. At the funeral, I was seated in the second row, behind Maxwell and Charlotte. The eulogy, delivered by Maxwell's oldest friend, mentioned me only once, as David's devoted wife who carries his child, the future of the Blackwell name. That evening, Maxwell invited me to his study. Charlotte served tea, then left us alone. "Eleanor," Maxwell said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "we need to discuss the future." The future, according to Maxwell, involved me signing over guardianship of my unborn child to him and Charlotte in exchange for a generous trust fund and a house in another state. David would want his child raised in the family tradition, Maxwell explained, with the proper education, connections, opportunities. "You understand, of course, that the Blackwell name carries certain responsibilities." I didn't respond. I simply set down my teacup and walked out of the room. That night, I went to David's private office in our home, the one place Maxwell hadn't yet invaded, and opened his laptop. David and I had always shared passwords. No secrets between us had been our rule from the beginning. I expected to find comfort in his files, perhaps some photos or videos I hadn't seen. What I found instead was a carefully organized archive of documents, recordings, and emails dating back decades. Financial records showing systematic tax evasion and fraud. Emails discussing bribes to government officials. Recordings of board meetings where environmental regulations were deliberately flouted. Evidence of safety violations covered up. Whistleblowers silenced, communities poisoned. And at the center of it all, a personal journal David had kept, documenting his growing disillusionment with his father's business practices and his plans to transform the company once he took control. "Eleanor is right," he'd written just weeks before his diagnosis. "We can be profitable and ethical. We can lead the transition to sustainable energy instead of fighting it. Dad refuses to see that the future belongs to companies willing to evolve." The last entry was dated 2 days after his diagnosis. "If something happens to me, Eleanor will carry on our vision. She has all the research, all the knowledge, and now she'll have all the evidence too. Dad doesn't understand that times have changed. The empire he built through intimidation and corruption can't survive in the light. Eleanor will bring the light." Encrypted within the journal was a detailed plan, financial accounts I didn't know existed, contacts at regulatory agencies, journalists David had quietly been briefing, and allies within the company itself who were unhappy with Maxwell's leadership. The next morning, Charlotte arrived at my door with architectural plans for the nursery they were building at their estate. I invited her in for coffee. "I've been thinking about Maxwell's offer," I told her. Charlotte's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Oh, I'm glad to hear you're being sensible." "I have a counter-proposal," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a simple document outlining my terms: full control of my child's upbringing, a seat on the Blackwell Industries board, and the reinstatement of the Sustainable Energy Research Division with me as its director. Charlotte laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Maxwell will never agree to this. Then perhaps he preferred to explain to federal prosecutors why Blackwell Industries has been systematically falsifying environmental impact reports for the past 15 years, or why 3 whistleblowers who tried to expose safety violations at the Wyoming facility disappeared without a trace. Charlotte's face went very still. You're bluffing. I opened my laptop and played a short audio clip of Maxwell discussing how to hide certain financial transactions from regulators. David kept records, I said quietly, of everything. Within 24 hours, Maxwell's attorneys had drawn up new papers meeting all of my conditions. Within a week, I had been appointed to the board. Within a month, the research division had been established. Maxwell wouldn't look at me during board meetings. Charlotte stopped coming to prenatal appointments. But they both smiled for the cameras at the press conference announcing Blackwell Industries' new commitment to developing sustainable energy technologies. My daughter Sophia was born in August, with Maxwell and Charlotte present at the hospital, properly grandparental for the society photographers allowed to capture the moment. In private, Maxwell asked only one question: "Are you satisfied now?" I looked down at my daughter, with David's eyes and my determination. "Not yet," I answered honestly, "but I will be." Over the next 2 years, I systematically transformed Blackwell Industries from within. The research division expanded, developing breakthrough technologies that gradually began replacing the company's more environmentally destructive operations. Ethical compliance officers were installed at every facility. Community restoration projects were launched in areas previously damaged by the company's activities. Maxwell fought me at every step, but the evidence I possessed kept him in check. The board, initially loyal to him, gradually came to see the financial wisdom in our new direction as profits increased and the company's public image improved. Charlotte, surprisingly, became an ally. "I married Maxwell for the same reason you married David," she confided one evening after too many glasses of wine. "I believed in what we could build together. Somewhere along the way, he forgot that businesses need to evolve to survive." Maxwell's health began to decline as the company transformed. Heart problems, his doctor said. Stress-related. He became less combative in meetings, sometimes sitting silently as we voted on initiatives he would have previously blocked. On his deathbed, he asked to see Sophia. I brought my daughter to his penthouse, watching carefully as he studied her face. "She has the Blackwell chin," he said finally, "and her father's eyes." "Yes," I agreed. "She's his legacy, not the company." Maxwell looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. "You could have destroyed everything," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Because David believed the company could be better. He believed in redemption." Maxwell nodded slowly. "And do you believe in redemption?" I thought about the communities now being helped by Blackwell Foundation grants. The clean energy projects bringing jobs to areas previously devastated by extraction industries. The restoration efforts healing landscapes once scarred by corporate greed. "I believe in transformation," I answered, "and that's what David and I always wanted." After the memorial service, after the business associates and politicians had offered their condolences and departed, I stood alone in Maxwell's office, my office now, as the new CEO of Blackwell Industries. On the wall hung a portrait of Maxwell in his prime, imposing and formidable, alongside the traditional portraits of Blackwell patriarchs dating back 3 generations. Next to them now hung a new portrait, David, smiling with the warmth that had first drawn me to him, his eyes looking toward the future rather than the past. Below it, I'd had inscribed his favorite quote, the words he'd repeated whenever we discussed our vision for the company: "True power lies not in what you can take, but in what you can transform." Last week, Blackwell Industries announced the complete divestment of its remaining fossil fuel assets, completing the transition to a fully renewable energy corporation. The stock price hit an all-time high. 3 new research facilities are breaking ground next month. Sophia, now 5, attended the press conference, holding my hand as I spoke about honoring legacy through progress rather than tradition. Would Grandpa Maxwell be proud? She asked afterward, her question innocent but her eyes, David's eyes, shrewd and perceptive. I thought about Maxwell Blackwell, the empire builder who couldn't see that empires need to evolve or perish. About David, who had planted the seeds of transformation even knowing he might not live to see them grow. About the company now, purged of its toxic past and flourishing in new directions. I told my daughter carefully that your grandfather finally understood at the end that the greatest revenge against those who underestimate you isn't to destroy what they built, but to transform it into something better than they could have imagined. Sophia nodded solemnly. Later that evening, I found her in the home office, studying the sustainable energy patents hanging on the wall, my name and David's side by side on innovations now powering communities around the world. Some might call what I did revenge. I prefer to think of it as redemption, not just of a company, but of a legacy. David's legacy, our legacy. A transformation more complete and more satisfying than any act of destruction could ever be. In the end, the ultimate victory isn't in tearing down your opponents, but in building something so magnificent that their opposition becomes irrelevant. Something that changes the world in ways they never had the vision to imagine. That's not revenge, that's revolution.